Te pregunto.
Sí, no es que te dije que lo guardaras para él si hay como. I am an archaeologist with the Institute of Heritage Sciences of the Spanish National Research Council, although I have worked and still work on late prehistoric archaeology in Europe and Africa. My main research focuses on the archaeology of the recent past. In particular, I'm interested in the darker side of modernity, wars, mass migration, failed development projects, colonialism, predatory capitalism, and totalitarianism. I have conducted fieldwork related to these topics in Spain, Ethiopia, Brazil, and more recently, Equatorial Guinea. My research on the recent past is guided by four main concerns: politics, the poetics of knowledge, materiality, and time. ¿Vale? Bueno, y ahora ya os dejo con él, ¿vale? Que lo va a hacer mucho mejor que yo. Venga.
Good morning. It's a little bit strange for me to speak English for a Spanish audience, so I feel a little bit weird speaking to you in English, but I will try. And I hope that you can understand, because I usually have to do an effort to speak English for an English audience, so I have to try to be as, to look or to sound as native speaker as possible, whereas here I will try to make my English understandable for people that do not speak English usually. As Carmina said, I'm an archaeologist that works on the contemporary past, that is the 20th century and even the 21st century. And my main topic of study, my main theme of research is destruction. It is death, it is pain, it is the dark side of modernity, the dark side of the present. And one of the elements that constitute this dark present, this dark modernity, is concentration camps. So I excavate and I study concentration camps. And I excavate concentration camps not in Germany, but in Spain. So I'm interested in the fate of the vanquished during the Spanish Civil War, the Republicans that lost the war, the Spanish Civil War between 1936 and 1939. So who invented the concentration camps? Do you know who invented the concentration camps? But do you know what a concentration camp is? Right? And you know a country that is known for their concentration camps? Yeah, exactly. Germany. The Nazi concentration camps are the famous concentration camps. When we think about a concentration camp, an extermination camp, more particularly we think in Germany. But who invented actually the concentration camp? Who was the first nation to develop concentration camps to deal with civilians, not with soldiers, but with innocent people? It was Spain. It was Spain, but not in Spain. It was Spain in the colonies. It was in Cuba during the Cuban War between 1896 and 1898. At that time, Spain had big problems to destroy resistance, the insurrection against the imperial government. So what one of the problems is that the population in the countryside was very much scattered. So it was very difficult to control the population in the jungles of Cuba. So what the Spanish government did was to construct campos de reconcentración, reconcentration camps, to resettle these people that were living in isolated villages and put them all together in the same camps behind barbed wire. And in these concentration camps, hundreds of thousands of Cubans died of disease, of torture, of starvation, such as this old man. Then this same invention, this way of dealing with civilians, of an enemy nation was employed in other colonial contexts. It was employed in Africa by the British, in South Africa, to deal with the Boers, with the Dutch colonists that had arrived there before the British. And it was employed in other colonial contexts. But concentration camps were for people that were not real humans, from the point of view of the imperial nation, of the colonizers. So it was for blacks, for the people of Indochina or the people of Australia. It was not for whites. It was not for people with white skin, blonde hair, blue eyes. Right? It was only for uncivilized people. But things started to change in the 1920s. The concentration camps arrived to Europe and were first used by the communists in Russia during the 1920s and especially during the 1930s with Stalin, and were used by the Nazis, of course, to deal with the political opposition. And finally, they were used in Spain also. In all cases, they were used against a population that was considered by the rulers, by the new rulers, by the dictatorships, as not real humans. In the case of Russia, the people that were not considered real humans were the rich peasants, for example, what they called the kulaks. In the case of the Nazis, it was pretty much everybody who was not Aryan. The Jews, of course, but also political dissidents. It was also the homosexuals. It was also people from the Slavic countries. So a lot of people were not considered humans by the Nazis. And in the case of Spain, it was the Republicans mostly, the people that were associated to the Republic that had been vanquished during the war. So around 500,000 people were imprisoned in concentration camps in Spain. That's a lot of people. Of these 500,000 people, at least 30,000 died of starvation, of disease, beatings, or executed, legally or illegally. So probably among you there are people that has relatives that have been in a concentration camp, probably. Maybe you don't know it, but if you ask, maybe your great-grandfather was in a concentration camp. So what's the problem with concentration camps from a scientific point of view? One of the problems is that we don't have a lot of documents to study these concentration camps, because many of these documents were destroyed after the war or after the dictatorship. So what archaeology can do in this context is to study what documents cannot tell us. We can study these buildings or these spaces that were used as concentration camps, and it can discover things about how people lived in these concentration camps and how they died. In Spain there were concentration camps everywhere. There were concentration camps in Galicia. There were concentration camps in Rianxo, in Coruña, in Cedeira, in Ferrol, in Camposancos, in Muros. There were many concentration camps in Betanzos, so there is a long list of concentration camps. But in most cases, such as this one in Camposancos, they did not build the typical concentration camp that we know from the movies, like the barbed wire and barracks. They reused all buildings, and this makes these camps very difficult to study from an archaeological point of view, because they have been reused later. Some of them are schools, some of them are seminars, some of them are factories, such as this one in Rianxo that was destroyed only a few years ago. So what my team and I have been doing is looking for these concentration camps that have not been destroyed or have not been completely altered by uses after the war. And one of these concentration camps is the camp of Castuera, and this is a typical concentration camp. This is the kind of camp that comes to your mind when you think about concentration camps. It was an enclosure of barbed wire with around 80 barracks where the prisoners were herded. It was used during approximately 1 year only, so this is very good for archaeologists because we know that anything we find there, it is from the period of use of the concentration camp. So it was not used afterwards. So everything belongs to the use of this space as a concentration camp. And how did we study this concentration camp? So there are two methods for studying the past. Basically, by archaeologists. One of them is field walking. We walk and we try to find things on the surface. The other method is, of course, excavation. We practice both methods in this case, but particularly excavation. And one of the things that we excavated is a photograph of the concentration camp in 1946, that is shortly after it was abandoned. And one of the things that we excavated were the latrines of the concentration camp. And why did we excavate that? For two main reasons. The latrines were usually used as a dump. So it was a place where people put rubbish. And archaeologists work with rubbish. So the artifacts that we can use to construct, to tell our stories, are based on rubbish. So if we want to find rubbish, we go to places that have rubbish. For example, a latrine that has been backfilled. And we indeed find a lot of materials in these latrines. But there is another reason. We know from memories of the people that were incarcerated in concentration camps that latrines were a tool of punishment. So people were punished there in different ways, and we will see that. One of the ways is that people were in charge of excavating the latrines. And it was not easy to do that, because they, in cases such as Castuera, they had to dig through the very hard rock, and they were starving, they didn't eat enough, they were very weak, but still they had to work to hew this very hard rock. Here you can see how they use the latrine as a dump. There are many things that come from the camp, such as, for example, dishes and tin cans and other artifacts. But what we can see how latrines were used as a tool of punishment is in the fact that latrines were public. So there were, of course, not individual toilets or something like that. People could only go to the toilet, to these latrines, once a day. So you really needed to go to the toilet. You had to wait several hours until you and all your comrades or your colleagues were taken to the latrines. So it was like perhaps 200 people using these latrines at the same time. And you have to do this in public view, so everybody saw you, doing what you usually do in a toilet, but in front of everybody. And it is not something that only your comrades had to see. It was also people from the village, because the latrines were close to a road that led to the nearby village. So people could see these Republican inmates doing their things in the latrine. So it was a huge humiliation for these people to do this. And then they also suffered from constipation, because they ate so little that they really didn't have nothing to do in the toilet. So it was a torture. When they remember that, it was a torture to be able to defecate. And in fact, in some cases, they had to use really horrible methods to be able to defecate. For example, they used can openers, the kind of can opener that is used to open a sardine can. They introduced these through the anus to extract the feces. And this caused them hemorrhages, and sometimes they fell in the latrines. So it was hell for them to